Our next speaker is Sarah Cash. Since July of 2015, Sarah has been Associate Curator of American and British Paintings at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, where she served as consulting curator following the September 2014 closure of Washington's Corcoran Gallery of Art, a sad event that was. At the Corcoran, she was the Beschhofer, I hope I'm saying that correctly, curator of American art for 16 years, responsible for that museum's renowned collection of American paintings, sculpture, works on paper, dating from the 18th century, I believe, to the early 20th. From 1995 to 1998, Sarah served as director of the Meyer Museum of Art at Randolph-Macon's Women's College, now Randolph College, and prior to that, from 1990 to 1995, she was assistant curator at the Amon Carter Museum. She has also held positions at the Yale University Art Gallery and the National Portrait Gallery. Sarah received her BA in art history from Smith College and an MA from Williams College graduate program in the history of art. She is a 2014 fellow of the Center for Curatorial Leadership and a graduate of the Museum Management Institute at Berkeley. She serves on the board of the Arlington, Virginia Arts Center and on the National Advisory Board of Rinalda House, the Museum of American Art in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Today, Sarah will present her insights into the collecting of William Corcoran in her presentation, Encouraging American Genius, William Wilson Corcoran. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Cash.
Good morning. Thank you, Inga, and thank you to Linda and everyone for having me here today for this wonderful symposium. A brief head note. In my images and remarks, I'll make reference to Corcoran Gallery of Art works now in the collection of the National Gallery of Art. As Inga just mentioned, the Corcoran, founded by William Wilson Corcoran, the subject of my talk, closed its doors on September 28, 2014, when much of its collection was absorbed by the National Gallery of Art, and the Corcoran College of Art and Design was incorporated into George Washington University. William Wilson Corcoran was born in Georgetown in 1798 to Irish immigrants Thomas Corcoran and Hannah Lemon, who you see on the left. Thomas Corcoran was a successful leather merchant and twice elected mayor of Georgetown, and his connections to prominent Georgetown and Baltimore families would prove of great benefit to his youngest son. The young William studied at private schools in Georgetown and for 1 year at Georgetown College. He soon joined his brothers in their dry goods business before establishing his own business, and later managed his father's real estate holdings and other affairs. Assisted by his father's relationships with local bankers, he opened a small brokerage house beginning in 1836, moving his office from Georgetown to the city of Washington. In 1840, Corcoran and George Washington Riggs, who you see on the left, Corcoran's on the right, formed a new banking firm designated in 1844 to be the only federal depository in Washington. Corcoran and Riggs financed Samuel Morse's invention of the telegraph in 1845, one of several notable backings. The pair's biggest triumph occurred in 1848, when Corcoran traveled to Europe to sell $16 million worth of United States bonds to finance the Mexican-American War. The sale made the partners wealthy men and established Corcoran as the leading international banker in the U.S. He retired from business in 1854, at about age 56, that is, leaving the bank to his partner. In 1835, Corcoran married Louise Amory Morris, a Commodore's daughter. Just 5 years later, Louise, never in good health, died of tuberculosis, a month shy of her 22nd birthday. She was quite a bit younger than Mr. Corcoran. She left behind the couple's only child to survive infancy, Louise Morris Corcoran. Corcoran never remarried and mourned his wife's death for the rest of his life. And Louise gave the miniature self-portrait that you see on the right to Corcoran during their courtship. Little is known of Corcoran's early knowledge of or interest in art. He may have known of Baltimorean Robert Gilmore Jr., and I'm going left to right on the screen, and Edward Carey in Philadelphia, or New Yorker Luman Reed. Corcoran was definitely acquainted with Samuel Gray Ward at the far right, a Boston financier and founder of the Metropolitan Museum of Art and collector. Seems more likely, however, that Corcoran was inspired to begin amassing the art collection that would become the founding gift to his eponymous museum as a result of his growing philanthropic interests. These, in turn, were closely intertwined with the mores of the Victorian era, when successful individuals were proud of American achievement and deeply mindful of their responsibilities for the country's social and cultural improvement. Just a few examples of Corcoran's generosity towards causes in Washington. By the mid-40s, he was supporting religious, educational, and cultural causes, continuing the tradition established by his father. He was on a committee that founded the National Theater in 1835. By act of Congress in 1849, he donated the beautiful Oak Hill Cemetery to Georgetown, where you see the family mausoleum and a chapel designed by James Renwick. His interest in urban beautification extended to his activities on a landscaping committee for Lafayette Square opposite the White House. He was a co-founder and president for a while of the Washington Monument Society to further efforts to get that monument built, as you see at the lower right. He established the Louise home in memory of his wife in the 1860s to help Confederate widows and others destitute after the war. And he was very generous towards churches, including St. John's Church near his home on Lafayette Square, which you may know as the President's Church across from the White House. He was generous towards educational causes, including what is now George Washington University, as well as to Virginia universities left damaged during the Civil War. At the time of his death, it was estimated that he had donated more than $5 million to various causes during his lifetime, and wrote to his grandchildren at age 80. At age 80, he wrote, quote, "From early youth to old age, I endeavored to be generous to the deserving," end quote, and regarded his uncommon wealth, quote, as a sacred trust for the benefit of knowledge, truth, and charity. In the 1840s, Corcoran purchased a number of works, primarily on the recommendation of friends, business associates, political allies, and the all-important, but usually unnamed, connoisseurs, or with such individuals acting as his agents. I'm showing you not works that were in Mr. Corcoran's original collection, because those works are now unlocated, but rather examples by three artists that he collected early on, Bruegel, Robb, and Lely, examples that you see on the screen, just to give you an idea of the sorts of things he was collecting. By the late 1840s, he was buying contemporary European paintings fairly regularly, often while traveling abroad, and sometimes directly from artists. The South Carolina diplomat, there are a lot of political connections here, as it was Washington, who served in Belgium, greatly influenced Corcoran's early taste for contemporary Belgian painters, and in 1850 sent him 2 additional landscapes by Robb and a floral still life by Jean-Baptiste Monnoyer that you see on the left. He also purchased for Corcoran, not that exact still life and not the exact Van Dyck on the right, again, examples. Clemson also purchased a Christ Bound for Corcoran, said to be, we don't know, by Anthony Van Dyck. These purchases show Corcoran, like other collectors active in the antebellum period, to be quite traditional in his tastes, concentrating primarily on paintings by French, German, and Belgian academic artists popular at the time. As the Corcoran Gallery's first curator, William MacLeod, later recalled, Corcoran often remarked that he, quote, liked what was pleasing and beautiful and recoiled from works of a tragical and painful character. Good advice, end quote. Sometime in the late 1840s or early 1850s, these forays into collecting European art culminated in Corcoran's purchase of a massive canvas, you see on the left, by the German neoclassical painter Anton Raphael Mengs, entitled Adoration of the Shepherds. Corcoran's interest in the art of his own country developed nearly concurrently with this collecting activity in the European realm. In 1850, he made his first known acquisition of an American painting, a conservative choice of a sentimental subject, equal in importance and certainly scale to the Mengs. This was Daniel Huntington's second version of his acknowledged masterpiece, Mercy's Dream, based on John Bunyan's popular Pilgrim's Progress, purchased from the New York gallery Williams, Stevens, and Williams. The first version of Mercy's Dream, of course, and its pendant, now at the Pennsylvania Academy, were commissioned by Edward Cary, and they became famous through engravings. These were surely known to Corcoran and I'm sure an inspiration for his purchase. Oops. Corcoran's taste for historical and religious scenes was closely aligned not only with the interest of Cary, but also those of Corcoran's friend, New Yorker Abraham M. Cozens. Cozens, who owned a small, undated sketch for the ever-popular Mercy's Dream, favored elaborate scenes by Emanuel Leutze, Louis Lang, and Henry Peters Gray, as well as landscapes by John F. Kensett, all artists whom Corcoran patronized in his early years of collecting. And here I show you a history painting with a very long title that you can see on the screen by Emanuel Leutze. Corcoran purchased it from Leutze in 1854. As early as 1849, Corcoran needed to acquire more space for himself, his daughter Louise, as well as his growing art collection. He purchased his friend Daniel Webster's home at the northwest corner of Lafayette Square across from the White House, and you see it pictured on the screen. By 1855, he had opened the private picture gallery in his residence to the public at least 2 days each week. In the fall of 1851, Corcoran made his first known purchase of an American landscape painting, Christopher Cranch's Castel Gandolfo, that you see on the left, after visiting the artist's studio in New York. 1 year later, Corcoran acquired a small Kensett oil at the 1852 American Art Union sale, as well as Thomas Doughty's View on the Hudson in Autumn on the right, attesting to his growing interest in collecting American landscapes by already established artists. By March 1853, Corcoran had purchased what would remain the most significant American landscape paintings in his collection, Thomas Cole's allegorical pair, The Departure and the Return, from 1837. By 1857, Corcoran had acquired 13 American landscapes, including not only those we've just seen, but also works by Jasper Francis Cropsey, Alvin Fisher, George Innes, John F. Kensett, and Régis Gignoux. About 1851, when he began collecting American landscapes, Corcoran also started acquiring American genre paintings. Here, too, he patronized reasonably well-established artists like the vastly popular William Tiley Ranney, whose painting is seen on the left, and bought recently completed works directly from the artists. By 1857, he had purchased Eastman Johnson's Girl with Pets, or The Pets, Center, and by 1859, he had purchased from the Baltimore artist Frank Blackwell Mayer, Mayer's morality scene, Leisure and Labor, at the far right. By the middle of the decade, Corcoran began to add a few Western paintings, which, like Hudson River School and genre scenes, had achieved great favor among collectors. These canvases were popularized through the sales, lotteries, and popular prints sponsored by the American Art Union, about which we heard a lot yesterday, and other organizations, leading one critic to complain that such images were, quote, becoming painfully conspicuous in our exhibitions and shop windows, of which glaring red shirts, buckskin breeches, and very coarse prairie grass are the essential ingredients, end quote. Seth Eastman's Ball Playing Among the Sioux may have been bought as early as 1851 or 52. You see it on the left. And by 1859, Corcoran had acquired another Western genre scene, John McStanley's The Trappers. Nearly from the start of his collecting, Corcoran was interested in American sculpture. Arguably his most momentous purchase in any genre, and the work that surely sparked his interest in expanding his sculpture holdings, was his acquisition in 1851 of the first of 5 replicas of Hiram Power's renowned Greek slave. The original of which had earned Power's instant fame when it was exhibited at the Great Exposition of 1851 in London's Crystal Palace. Placed on view in Corcoran's home on Lafayette Square for the first time at his annual Christmas party in December 1851, the marble engendered reactions of shock at the figure's nudity, yet acclaim for the collector's good taste in acquiring the most celebrated sculpture in antebellum America. The sculpture's tremendous significance to the collector was manifested not only in this momentous unveiling, but also in the central role it played in his personal life. In 1859, his daughter Louise married George Eustis, a Louisiana congressman, in the Corcoran home, with the Greek slave serving as their altarpiece. More of which can be read in a wonderful article by Lauren Lessing. Later, Corcoran would have a special octagonal gallery constructed for the prized marble in his first museum building. Soon after purchasing the Greek slave, Corcoran acquired other sculptures by Powers, as well as those by Alexander Galt, Larkin Mead, Joel Hart, and William Henry Reinhardt, such as Endymion, as you see on the screen here. And governing his interests, Corcoran's interest from the start Governing Corcoran from the start was his interest in supporting Washington artists and arts organizations. The son of immigrants who had made his fortune from scratch through various business opportunities, Corcoran apparently was eager to discover contemporary American artists and to support them by financing their study, purchasing their paintings, and providing them with commissions. Corcoran heavily patronized local artists active in the short-lived but exceedingly influential Washington Art Association, which was active from 1856 to 1860. Those included Eastman Johnson, Seth Eastman, John McStanley, Emanuel Leutze, G.P.A. Healy, as well as landscape painter William McLeod, whose photo and painting you see on the screen. He later became the Corcoran Gallery's first curator. Corcoran purchased McLeod's Great Falls of the Potomac sometime before 1869, including it in his original gift to his museum. Corcoran and later his gallery also patronized many non-residents of the Washington Art Association, including Bierstadt, George Caleb Bingham, John W. Caslier, Frederick Edwin Church, Asher B. Durand, Huntington Kensett, Charles Bird King, and more, and the sculptor Henry Kirk Brown. It's hard to end the history of William Wilson Corcoran as a collector with the opening of his museum, since he had a strong hand in acquisitions for the next 2 decades and more. These two histories are very closely intertwined. In 1859, having amassed and cataloged a fairly substantial collection by then outgrowing his home, Corcoran decided to build his first museum building at the corner of 17th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue, a prominent and carefully chosen location diagonally across from the White House. You're noticing a theme here, the White House. Corcoran's strategic placement of the gallery reveals his ambition to shape his holdings into the core of a national collection for the capital city. As Alan Wallach has noted, Corcoran was the only 19th century American collector who showed no hesitation in developing such an institution. Corcoran chose the New York architect James Renwick, familiar to New Yorkers, I'm sure, because he designed St. Patrick's Cathedral. He had also designed buildings for the Smithsonian and several commissions for William Wilson Corcoran himself. Corcoran asked Renwick to design a gallery in the Second Empire style, modeled on the new wings of the Louvre, which evidently had impressed Corcoran when he visited Paris in 1855. While the building's exterior was largely complete by 1861, the interior was unfinished, and at that time, Corcoran advised Renwick to halt work on the project, suspend it, owing to the state of the country. Moreover, having managed the finances of several Confederate leaders and entertained fellow Southern sympathizers at his home, Corcoran became the target of hostility from government officials. They soon appropriated the building, the Renwick building, as we call it, for federal use. The incomplete gallery building became a wartime clothing depot. Shortly thereafter, Corcoran found it expedient to decamp to Europe for the duration of the war, as any Southern sympathizer might do in his position. His hopes for a gallery undaunted, he traveled extensively, met with artists about his plans, and continued to buy European art. His return to Washington in 1865 was not an easy one, since the Secretary of State was attempting to bring charges of tax evasion against him. Corcoran also continued to pledge loyalty to the South despite its defeat, donating money to Southern causes and presiding over the Washington, D.C. memorial service for none other than Robert E. Lee, among other activities. Ignoring continued animosity toward him, Corcoran revived efforts to build his art collection, purchasing Frederick Church's Tamaka palms at the left from the estate of his friend Cozens in 1868. The painting surely reminded Corcoran of his friendships with Cozens and Humboldt, whose influential book, Cosmos, had inspired Church to visit the tropics. It was not until 1869 that the building was restored to Corcoran, the Renwick building. Feeling that his relationship with the government had improved to the point that he could resume work on his museum, he deeded the building, grounds, and his private collection to the first 9 members of a self-perpetuating board of trustees. Among those trustees were Corcoran's business partner, George W. Riggs, and his friend William T. Walters, seen at the left, of course, later co-founder of the Walters Art Gallery, now museum. Walters chaired the Acquisitions Committee from 1873 to 1877 and was assisted in that endeavor by his friends, their premier art agents and collectors, George Lucas, you see at the center, of Baltimore, and the New Yorker Samuel P. Avery. In founding his eponymous museum, Corcoran planned for the majority of his art collection to form the nucleus around which the gallery, to be dedicated to art, and that appears over the door of his museum, as well as the later building for his museum, those words, would develop. It was to be, quote, used solely for the purpose of encouraging American genius in the production and preservation of works pertaining to the fine arts and kindred objects. To fill the large rooms of the new gallery, Walters went on a buying trip abroad and purchased a number of large-scale paintings, as well as bronzes by Barye, whom he had patronized and promoted since the early 1860s. Corcoran advised the trustees on certain opportunities, such as the 1873 of part of Avery's New York gallery. The new museum opened on January 1st, 1874, and by the end of that year, all of the spaces were accessible to the public and displayed about 350 objects, including 112 paintings. We don't know whether Corcoran or Walters collaborated on the installation of the works of art, but the execution of those plans was surely overseen by the first curator, William MacLeod, whom I mentioned, who was responsible for the day-to-day operations of the gallery, including hanging and arranging works of art, receiving new acquisitions, overseeing copyists, handling correspondence, maintaining the catalog of paintings and sculpture, all the while keeping a daily journal of the gallery's goings-on from 1876 to 1886, which is a remarkable resource, I should say. He would note the daily weather, how many visitors came to the museum, what notable guests came into the Corcoran, and when artists came to call, such as when Frederick Church came to touch up the sky of his painting, Niagara. They're wonderful to read and a great research resource. From the outset, visitors to the Corcoran Gallery were meant to view American paintings and sculpture as integral to and a continuation of the great tradition of Western art, almost certainly to demonstrate, as Alan Wallach observes, that native art could hold its own against continental examples. To that end, the ground floor sculpture hall, and you're seeing that at the upper right, welcomed visitors with replicas of dozens of famous sculptures. Yet another gallery featured Barye bronzes, American marble sculptures, maiolica, and electrotype reproductions. After ascending the grand staircase, visitors could view the special octagonal gallery, specially designed by Renwick to showcase Power's magnificent Greek slave, and you see that at the lower right. The survey of Western art continued. Directly above the sculpture hall and the museum's greatest feature, its vast main gallery of paintings, seen at the lower left, showcasing 90-odd canvases hung floor to ceiling in the salon style. American works hung alongside examples from Corcoran's growing collection of portraits of American presidents. Corcoran must have been exceedingly pleased with the opening of his gallery, and a portrait commissioned from him around this time is a telling likeness. It shows the proud founder standing in front of his new building, which you see at the left, positioned appropriately on the entrance steps of a nearby structure that offered a number of artist studios, with the Capitol seen over Corcoran's left shoulder, that is seen to our right in the distance, if you can make that out. There's the dome, there's the Renwick. Despite the fact that it is not possible to see these two buildings in the background at the same time, in reality, Corcoran is strategically positioned between his, quote, pleasure for residents and visitors at the national metropolis, as he called it, and the structure housing Congress, whose attention he constantly courted. The benefactor all but touts the national quality of his museum. The popular press played an important role in spreading the word of Corcoran's patriotic goals. As early as 1869, and building to a crescendo with the gallery opened in 1874, critics far and wide resoundingly emphasized the national nature of the institution. Typical was a Philadelphia writer who in 1869, remember the building wasn't even open yet, anticipated that the gallery would be, quote, fit to make a highly credible Louvre facing President's Square, end quote, and hailed Corcoran as, quote, an American Mecenas, end quote, or major benefactor of the arts. Writing in 1872, another critic wrote, the gallery, quote, will be visited by people from every section of the country, and the ideas thus obtained will naturally permeate the body politic at home. And the time may come when Congress will be instructed to vote for good pictures or statues, rather than for political measures of doubtful policy, end quote. In 1874, when the building had opened, a columnist wrote simply, Washington may now pride herself upon a national gallery of art, a sentiment echoed in the illustration that you see at the left from the New York Daily Graphic. Another writer in 1874 observed that the Greek slave, quote, marked our first succession in national art, end quote, and lavished praise on the gallery's premier status. He also exulted, acknowledging New York's newly opened Metropolitan Museum of Art. In 1 year from this time, we, the Corcoran, shall have the best collection south and west of the Hudson. 10 years from this time, we will have the second gallery in rank in the United States. Indeed, from its cornerstone laid in 1859, to its opening in 1874, the Corcoran was the country's first cultural institution to be established expressly as an art museum with a purpose-built building, that is compared to athenaeums or academies, such as the Pennsylvania Academy. And this may all be a matter of splitting hairs when it comes to words and descriptions, but I think there is a certain distinction there given to the Corcoran when it opened in 1874. Moreover, it was the first gift of an art museum of substantial size to the American public by a single individual. Its successful charter was a testament to the vision, perseverance, and generosity of its namesake, particularly in a city that, relative to New York, Boston, or Philadelphia, was really something of a cultural backwater in the middle of the 19th century. All of this critical and official praise, as well as the public's enthusiastic attendance at the new gallery, must have bolstered Corcoran's stated aim of encouraging American genius. Almost immediately, he set into motion a two-pronged plan to cement the reputation of his new museum as the first successful national gallery, which in part must have been inspired by his desire to return himself to national favor after his flight to Europe during the Civil War. First, the institution would incorporate a national portrait gallery. Second, the gallery's patriotic nature would be further enhanced by the acquisition of additional major landscape and genre paintings by contemporary American artists, or near contemporary. So Corcoran remained deeply involved in shaping these acquisitions, and he often bought works of art and served as a conduit of information to the trustees, so still very much a collector. By 1874, he had already amassed a significant corpus of official likenesses, including the Sully portrait of Andrew Jackson at the left. But the most significant acquisition of a group of official portraits occurred in 1879, when Corcoran purchased 15 presidential likenesses by G.P.A. Healy from the Chicago businessman and philanthropist Thomas B. Bryan. This series included portraits of all the presidents through the beardless Abraham Lincoln, as you see here, a wonderful painting, except for two, and grew as presidents were elected up until the turn of the century. In 1875, Corcoran eagerly paid for an important group of likenesses that the Library of Congress declined to acquire, 818 profile portrait engravings of distinguished Americans by the French-born artist Saint-Memon. The single most important acquisition of a presidential likeness occurred in 1884 when Phoebe Warren Taylor, widow of the Washington diplomat and collector Benjamin Ogle Taylor, bequeathed to the gallery its first of two Gilbert Stuart Athenaeum-like portraits of George Washington. The second prong of Corcoran's plan was to obtain major landscapes and genre paintings by artists not already represented in the collection. Corcoran often played a direct and sometimes an advisory role. He purchased some works at the Centennial Exposition in 1876, now unlocated, and also Durand's Edge of the Forest that you see at the left, and Worthington Whitridge's Trout Brook in the Catskills, directly from the painters, continuing a tradition he had begun in the 1850s. At the 1877 sale of Robert M. Oliphant's collection, Avery brokered the gallery's purchase of 2 Kensett landscapes, including view on the Genesee near Mount Morris at the left. The gallery continued to acquire genre paintings as well. William Sidney Mount's The Tough Story, which we saw yesterday, was acquired through a Baltimore dealer that had secured the painting from the nephew of Robert Gilmore, Jr. In 1876, the gallery attempted to add another painting by the renowned landscapist Frederick Church to the collection to complement Tamaka Palms. Given Corcoran's friendship with Alexander von Humboldt, the collector no doubt played an influential role when, in April 1876, the trustees, led by Riggs, planned to buy the artist's homage to the naturalist, the massive Heart of the Andes. The trustees agreed to bid as much as $8,000 at the William T. Blodgett collection sale in April 1876, but the painting sold to David Dowse for $10,000, the highest price paid to date for a work by a living artist. And of course, we know where the painting is now. Just 8 months later, the trustees redoubled their efforts to buy a Church painting and resolved to purchase Niagara, that you see on the screen, from the John Taylor Johnston collection. William T. Walters noted that if it could be secured, the painting acquisition, quote, would make others of small importance, indeed, and urged the expediency of getting the Church at any expense within our reach, music to a curator's ears. The bid was successful at a price of $12,500. The painting proved ever more popular after its acquisition. You see the first curator, McLeod, at the left, hosting the visit of the Jicarilla Apache delegates who posed in their native dress in front of the icon of Manifest Destiny. And Corcoran's students, the Corcoran School opened in 1890, flocked to the gallery to observe, sketch, and paint copies of the collection's famous works, paintings and sculptures alike. Corcoran had donated additional money for the Corcoran School of Art to open in 1890. If Mr. Corcoran's role in the acquisition of Niagara was undocumented in the museum records, the situation 2 years later was quite different. Albert Bierstadt was surely chagrined when Corcoran and his museum purchased works by Church and other prominent living artists. In 1877, Bierstadt, Church's greatest rival in the American landscape marketplace, displayed this enormous composite of Sierra Nevada mountain views at a New York City exhibition under the descriptive title Mountain Lake. The following year, doubtless inspired by Corcoran's well-publicized purchase of Niagara, Bierstadt offered the work, rechristened Mount Corcoran, to the museum and its founder. Staff and board members were deeply suspicious, but Bierstadt presented them with a War Department map showing the mountain's location. Curator William McLeod opined that a government official had written Corcoran's name on the map, quote, by hand, sharp practice on the part of the artist, end quote. However, it was revealed that the artist had, in fact, named a specific Sierra Nevada peak for the banker, albeit after he had offered the canvas. Undeterred by the controversy surrounding the painting's acquisition, the artist stated, quote, I am happy to have named one of our highest mountains after him, the first to catch the morning sunlight and the last to say goodnight, end quote. Despite these protests, in 1878, Bierstadt succeeded in selling Corcoran his massive scene for $7,000, one half his original asking price. The painting entered the gallery collection later the same year. The steady collecting of contemporary American paintings in the 1870s was articulated as policy by Corcoran in 1879, when he firmly stated that it, quote, is not the design of the institution to purchase old works, but for the encouragement of American genius, end quote. This was a time in Washington when many, many contemporary artists were very active, living and working in studio buildings near the White House, near the Corcoran Gallery. Corcoran supported many of them. He opened a studio building for artists, and one of those artists was Richard Norris Brooke, whose pastoral visit you see on the screen, and the painting was acquired immediately after it was painted by the trustees, surely with Corcoran's encouragement. Sanford Gifford, in 1881, Corcoran supplied funds for the acquisition of Sanford Gifford's last important painting, Ruins of the Parthenon, the first canvas by the artist to enter an art museum. Corcoran bought the painting for $5,100, at the time the highest price ever paid for one of the artist's works, from Gifford's estate auction in New York. Gifford had tried unsuccessfully to place the picture, which he considered the crowning achievement of his career, in a museum collection. When he attempted to do that, he visited the Corcoran, and when he reached the gallery at the Corcoran featuring Church's Niagara, he remarked, quote, "There would be a good place for my Parthenon," end quote. And just finishing up, following William Wilson Corcoran's death in 1888, his legacy endured in the museum he had created for the city of Washington and the nation. The gallery steadily continued through gift and purchase to make acquisitions, and by 1891, the expanding collection, the demand for more space for exhibitions and for students, led to the commission of Ernest Flagg to design the second and final home of the Corcoran Gallery of Art, which opened in 1897. With President Grover Cleveland and his entire cabinet in attendance at the festivities. By this time, the collection had about 1,850 works of art. And a little postscript to my remarks, because it's a wonderful New York story, and we're in New York. I suspect that the trustees of the Corcoran wanted to open their very large new building on the 8th of January, 1897, with a bang. At the sale of the estate of Marshall O. Roberts in January of that year, just weeks after the building had opened, at Chickering Hall in New York, the gallery attempted to acquire a third Leutze painting for its collection. I'm showing you the Leutze on the right that was already in the collection. Leutze's massive Washington crossing the Delaware. But the Corcoran trustees were outbid in a vigorous battle by none other than Samuel Putnam Avery, who had assisted with so many Corcoran acquisitions in the 1870s. Avery was bidding for John S. Kennedy, who immediately gave the painting to the Metropolitan. William Wilson Corcoran may be characterized as a collector who made acquisitions in order to echo his accomplishments as a self-made man and to embrace the culture of philanthropy in his era. Like the few other East Coast collectors of American art at this time, Corcoran amassed American paintings and sculpture in tandem with European examples and was of a more independent mind in selecting American works than he was when purchasing European ones. Unlike some collectors, however, Corcoran did not forsake American for European art after the Civil War, but rather increased his American purchases to develop his national gallery and his national portrait gallery and to demonstrate his patriotism. Nonetheless, his taste was never very radical or adventurous, nor particularly varied. And he also never collected still life paintings or colonial portraits. And later on, the gallery's board also declined to acquire such paintings and portraits. Perhaps most important, unlike other 19th century American patrons, or most other of them, Corcoran ensured, or as we know today, tried to ensure, that his collection had a permanent home in his gallery. Additionally, the education of the nation's artists or the encouragement of American genius, as stated in the Corcoran's charter, played a critical role in the gallery's history from the very beginning. The legacy of encouraging American genius and collecting historical and especially contemporary art, the latter notably through purchases from its biennials of contemporary painting beginning in 1907, continued until the Corcoran closed its doors in September 2014. My National Gallery colleagues and I are doing our best to honor the legacy of William Wilson Corcoran and his museum through our galleries, which I hope you will come see, all newly integrated with Corcoran works, and to honor Corcoran's legacy and the legacy of his museum through our galleries, research, exhibitions, publications, and more. Thank you.